There is something dangerous about people that most of us learn far too late. People rarely tell you who they really are. They tell you who they want you to believe they are. They give you the right words. They smile at the right moment. They tell you what you want to hear. They make promises. They appear interested. They appear kind. And because their words sound convincing, you trust them. But here is the problem. Words are often the easiest part of a person to control. Behavior is much harder to control. The way someone looks at you when they think you're not paying attention, the way their voice changes when they become uncomfortable, the way they react when someone else receives attention, the way they treat people who cannot benefit them. These things reveal far more than a beautiful conversation ever will. If you want to understand people before you trust them, you have to stop listening only to what they say. You have to start watching what they reveal because every person is constantly communicating something, even when they are silent. And once you learn how to read those signals, you begin to see people differently. You stop asking, what is this person telling me? And you start asking, what is this person showing me? That question can protect you from years of disappointment. The first rule is simple: never judge someone by how they treat you when they want something from you. Watch how they treat people they don't need. Anyone can be charming when there is something to gain. A person can be incredibly polite to their boss and incredibly cruel to the waiter. They can be affectionate towards someone powerful and dismissive towards someone they consider insignificant. They can praise you when you are useful and forget you the moment you are no longer valuable to them. This is one of the clearest windows into character, because when people believe there are no consequences, their real nature begins to appear. Pay attention to how someone speaks about people who aren't in the room. If every former friend is crazy, every ex partner is toxic, every former colleague is jealous, and every person who disagreed with them is somehow an enemy, don't ignore the pattern. You don't need to immediately decide that they're a bad person, but you should become curious because people reveal themselves through patterns. One story can be a coincidence, 10 identical stories are information. And this brings us to another powerful rule: don't listen only to the story, listen to the way the story is told. Watch where the emotion appears. Watch what they emphasize. Watch what they leave out. Someone can tell you a story in which they are completely innocent, but sometimes the most important information is hidden in what they never mention. Human beings are extremely good at constructing explanations that protect their self-image. We don't like seeing ourselves as selfish, insecure, jealous, dishonest, or weak. So when we make a mistake, we often create a story that makes the mistake understandable, and other people do the same thing. This is why you should never rush to trust someone's explanation of their own behavior. Watch the behavior first, then listen to the explanation. The behavior gives you the evidence. The explanation gives you their interpretation of the evidence. Those are not always the same thing. And one of the most revealing things you can observe is how someone reacts when they don't get what they want. This is where character becomes visible. When everything goes their way, almost everyone can appear pleasant. But tell them no, disagree with them, set a boundary, take away their ability to control the situation, and watch what happens. A healthy person may be disappointed. They may argue. They may try to persuade you. But eventually, they can accept that you have the right to make your own decision. A manipulative person often reacts differently. Suddenly, the kindness disappears. They become cold. They guilt trip you. They become angry. They accuse you of changing. They remind you of everything they've done for you. They make you feel like you have committed some terrible betrayal simply because you said no. That reaction tells you something. It tells you that what looked like affection may have been control, and this is why boundaries are not just about protecting yourself. Boundaries are also a test. You don't need to provoke people, you don't need to manipulate them. Simply have standards. Say no when you mean no. Take your time. Don't explain yourself endlessly, and observe what happens. Because a person's reaction to your boundary often tells you more than 100 compliments ever could. Now watch the eyes. People have learned to control words. They have learned to control smiles. They have learned to present a certain image. But genuine emotion is much harder to control perfectly. Someone can tell you they're happy to see you, but does their face actually change when you arrive? Someone can tell you they're proud of you, but what happens in their expression when you succeed? Someone can congratulate you, but does something disappear from their eyes for a fraction of a second? These tiny reactions can matter, not because every facial movement proves someone's intentions, but because repeated patterns of nonverbal behavior can reveal emotional states that words are trying to hide. The important thing is not to become paranoid. It is to become observant. There is a huge difference. Paranoia sees enemies everywhere. Observation simply refuses to ignore evidence, and you should especially watch people when something unexpected happens. Because rehearsed behavior works best when the situation is predictable. Unexpected moments interrupt the performance. Someone walks into the room unexpectedly. You mention another person's success. You disagree with them. Someone else receives the attention they wanted. Plans suddenly change. Watch. Not because you are looking for a reason to condemn them, but because these moments reveal how they regulate themselves when they are no longer completely in control. Another powerful signal is the tone of someone's voice. Words can say, I'm fine. The voice can say something completely different. A person can tell you they are confident while speaking with hesitation. They can tell you they are relaxed while their voice becomes tense. They can say they don't care while their emotional intensity tells you that they care very deeply. The voice carries emotion, and emotion often escapes before the conscious mind can organize it. So don't just listen to the sentence. Listen to the emotional energy behind the sentence. Does their voice become colder when a certain person is mentioned? Does it become excited when they talk about something they genuinely love? Does their confidence disappear when challenged? Does their warmth appear only when they need something? These details matter. But there is an even more important signal, your own emotional reaction. Sometimes you meet someone and everything seems perfect. They are charming, they're intelligent, they're funny, they say all the right things, and yet something inside you feels uncomfortable. You can't explain it. You tell yourself you're being irrational, you ignore it. Later, you discover something was wrong. Why does this happen? Because your brain is constantly processing information that your conscious mind hasn't fully organized. You may notice the person's tone, their timing, their facial expressions, their contradictions, their posture, their behavior toward other people. You may not consciously put all of those pieces together, but your mind is collecting them. That's why intuition can sometimes feel like a signal without an explanation. But intuition should not become an excuse for irrational judgment. You don't blindly trust your intuition, you investigate it. When something feels wrong, slow down. Don't immediately accuse, don't immediately trust. Gather more information. Give reality time to reveal itself. This is one of the most powerful habits you can develop. Slow down the speed of trust. You don't have to hate someone. You don't have to expose them. You don't have to confront them. You simply don't have to give them access before they've demonstrated that they deserve it. Because trust should not be based on potential, it should be based on evidence. Someone says they're loyal, that's a claim. Someone repeatedly behaves loyally when loyalty costs them something, that's evidence. Someone says they respect you, that's a claim. Someone respects your boundaries when they disagree with you, that's evidence. Someone says they care about you. That's a claim. Someone remains present when you have nothing to offer them. That's evidence. Learn to separate words from proof. This single habit will change the way you see relationships. Now, there's another test that people rarely think about. Watch what happens when you succeed. Pay attention to people when you receive something they wanted, your promotion, your relationship, your opportunity, your recognition, your improvement, your confidence, your success. Real friends may feel happy for you even when they wish they had what you have. They may experience a little envy because they're human, but healthy people can turn that feeling into admiration or motivation. Toxic envy behaves differently. The smile becomes smaller, the congratulations sound forced. They immediately minimize the achievement. You got lucky. It wasn't that difficult. I could have done that too. Or they suddenly change the subject. Sometimes they don't attack you directly. They simply become less available. Your success changes the emotional atmosphere between you, and that is information. Never make the mistake of thinking that someone who loves you will automatically love everything that happens to you. Some people love you most when you are beneath them. They are comfortable when you need them. They are comfortable when you are struggling. But when you become stronger, more independent, more successful, or more confident, something changes. Why? Because your growth changes the power relationship, and people who secretly need superiority may experience your growth as a threat. So don't only watch who stands beside you when you are suffering. Watch who can genuinely celebrate you when you rise. That is often the harder test. Another thing you should watch is consistency. Charm can be performed for an evening, kindness can be performed for a week, promises can be made in seconds, but character requires consistency. Don't judge someone based on one beautiful conversation. Watch them over time. How do they behave when they're tired? How do they behave when they're stressed? How do they behave when they lose? How do they behave when they are embarrassed? How do they behave when nobody is watching? How do they behave when you disagree? How do they behave when you become successful? You are not looking for perfection. That is important. Every human being has contradictions. Everyone gets angry. Everyone becomes selfish sometimes. Everyone makes mistakes. The question is not whether someone is imperfect. The question is whether their behavior has a healthy pattern. Do they take responsibility? Can they apologize? Can they admit they were wrong? Can they change? Or do they constantly create explanations for why everything is someone else's fault? A person who can admit a mistake is often safer than a person who never makes mistakes in their own stories, because humility allows correction, and people who cannot admit fault eventually make everyone around them pay for their inability to face themselves. This is especially important when dealing with manipulators. Manipulation doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks like charm. Sometimes it looks like vulnerability. Sometimes it looks like excessive attention. Sometimes it looks like generosity. Sometimes it looks like someone understanding you better than anyone else ever has. The danger is not always the obvious villain. The dangerous person can be the person who knows exactly what you want to hear. They study your weaknesses. They discover your insecurities. They learn what makes you feel important. Then they use that information to create influence. This is why you should pay attention to how quickly someone tries to become extremely close to you. Real trust usually develops gradually. Manipulation often tries to accelerate intimacy. I've never felt this way about anyone. You're different from everyone else. I can tell you anything. You are the only person who understands me. These statements can be sincere, but when they appear too quickly, slow down, because emotional intensity is not the same thing as emotional depth. Someone can make you feel incredibly close to them without actually knowing you. And sometimes what feels like connection is simply emotional acceleration. So remember, this intensity is not proof of trustworthiness. Consistency is. And one of the most dangerous mistakes you can make is trusting someone because they understand your pain. Someone understanding your weakness doesn't automatically mean they care about you. Sometimes it simply means they have found the door into your psychology. That's why you should never give someone unlimited access to your deepest vulnerabilities simply because they appear sympathetic. Let trust develop, let behavior accumulate, let time reveal the pattern. Time is one of the greatest detectors of character because eventually the performance becomes exhausting. People cannot maintain a false identity perfectly forever. The impatient person eventually becomes impatient. The selfish person eventually reveals their priorities. The dishonest person eventually contradicts themselves. The controlling person eventually reacts when they lose control. The insecure person eventually reveals their need for validation. The jealous person eventually reacts to your success. And the genuinely good person, they remain relatively consistent. Not perfect, consistent. This is why you should stop trying so hard to figure people out immediately. You don't need to decode everyone in 5 minutes. You don't need to know someone's entire psychology after one conversation. Give people room to reveal themselves, observe, listen, wait, and most importantly, Don't let attraction, fear, loneliness, admiration, or desperation make your decisions for you. Because when you desperately want someone to be good, you become blind to evidence that they're not. When you're afraid of losing someone, you start negotiating against yourself. When you desperately want their approval, you begin interpreting every warning sign as something you should ignore. Your emotions can distort your perception. So sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is step back, create distance, and look again. Ask yourself, if I didn't desperately want this person in my life, what would I think about their behavior? That question can be incredibly revealing because clarity often appears when emotional attachment becomes quieter. And finally, remember this: reading people is not about becoming suspicious of everyone. It is about becoming difficult to deceive. There is a difference. You don't need to assume everyone is lying. You don't need to search for hidden enemies. You don't need to analyze every movement or every facial expression. You simply need to stop giving words more authority than behavior. Watch patterns, watch reactions, watch consistency, watch how people treat those who cannot help them, watch how they respond to your boundaries, watch how they respond to your success, watch how they behave when nobody is impressed, and watch how you feel around them. Because sometimes the greatest warning isn't something they say, it's the version of yourself that appears when you're around them. Do you become anxious? Do you constantly seek their approval? Do you feel like you're walking on eggshells? Do you become insecure? Do you feel that you have to earn their affection? Do you constantly question where you stand? Pay attention. Healthy relationships don't require you to constantly decode whether you are safe. They allow you to breathe. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson. The goal isn't to become someone who can read every person like an open book. The goal is to become someone who doesn't ignore the pages that are already visible. People reveal themselves, not always through what they say, but through what they repeat, through what they do when they are disappointed, through what they do when they are powerful, through what they do when they are ignored, through what they do when someone else succeeds, through what they do when they have nothing to gain. So don't rush to trust. Don't rush to distrust either. Observe. Let time work for you. Let patterns speak. And when someone's words and behavior don't match, don't force yourself to believe the words simply because they're more comfortable. Believe the pattern, because once you learn to watch people instead of merely listening to them, you gain something far more valuable than the ability to detect deception. You gain the ability to choose who deserves access to your life. And that is one of the most important forms of power you can ever develop. There is another level of reading people that most people never develop. They learn to notice what someone does, but they never learn to understand there's why they do it. And that distinction is extremely important because the same behavior can come from completely different motives. Someone may become distant because they are manipulative, or they may become distant because they are insecure. Someone may disagree with you because they want to control you, or because they genuinely see the situation differently. Someone may be quiet because they are hiding something, or because they simply have nothing to say. So the goal isn't to become suspicious. The goal is to become precise. You are not trying to label people. You are trying to understand patterns. And one of the best ways to understand a person's psychology is to watch what they consistently need from other people. Some people need admiration. Some need control. Some need attention. Some need reassurance. Some need to feel superior. Some need to be needed. And once you understand what someone desperately needs, you begin to understand what they are likely to do to obtain it. Think about someone who constantly needs admiration. At first, they may seem confident. They tell impressive stories. They talk about their achievements. They know how to enter a room and command attention. You may even admire them. But watch what happens when the attention moves somewhere else. Suddenly they become uncomfortable. They interrupt. They redirect the conversation. They criticize the person receiving attention, or they somehow find a way to make the moment about themselves again. That reaction is more informative than their confidence. Because confidence doesn't need constant applause, insecurity does. And this is one of the great paradoxes of human behavior. The person who appears extremely confident may sometimes be the person who is most dependent on external validation. Real confidence is usually quieter. It doesn't need to announce itself every 5 minutes. It doesn't need everyone in the room to agree. It doesn't collapse when someone else succeeds. So when you meet someone impressive, don't only ask, how impressive are they? Ask, what happens to them when nobody is impressed? That is a much better question. Now consider another type of person, the person who needs control. They may not look controlling at first. They may look caring. They ask where you are, who you're with, what you're doing. They want to help you make decisions. They give advice constantly. They may even tell you, I'm only saying this because I care about you. And sometimes they really do care. But watch the reaction when you don't follow their advice. That's the test. A caring person can give advice and still respect your freedom. A controlling person gives advice because they need the outcome. When you choose differently, they feel personally threatened. They may become angry. They may withdraw affection. They may punish you with silence. They may make you feel irresponsible. They may repeatedly question your judgment until you finally surrender. The important clue isn't the advice, it's the reaction to your independence. Because healthy love allows another person to remain a separate human being, control needs you to become predictable. And the more you understand this, the more carefully you will interpret certain forms of attention, because attention is not always affection. Sometimes attention is surveillance. Sometimes concern is control. Sometimes generosity creates obligation. Sometimes vulnerability is used to accelerate intimacy. You have to look beyond the surface. And one of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is, what does this person want me to feel? Not just, what are they saying? What emotion are they trying to create inside you? Do they want you to feel guilty? Do they want you to feel special? Do they want you to feel afraid of losing them? Do they want you to feel responsible for their emotions? Do they want you to feel indebted? Do they want you to feel inferior? This question can reveal the hidden structure of an interaction, because manipulation is often less about what someone says and more about what they are trying to make you feel. Imagine someone makes a mistake. Instead of apologizing, they become extremely emotional. Suddenly you're comforting them. You started the conversation because they hurt you. 5 minutes later, you're apologizing for making them upset. What happened? The conversation changed direction. The original issue disappeared. And now you're managing their emotions instead of discussing their behavior. That is something worth noticing. Not necessarily because the person is evil, but because emotional intensity can sometimes redirect attention away from responsibility. So when someone becomes extremely emotional during accountability, don't automatically surrender your position. Stay calm. Ask yourself, are we solving the problem or are we escaping the problem? That distinction is powerful. And this leads to another rule. Watch how people handle accountability. A mature person can hear something uncomfortable without immediately turning it into an attack. They may become defensive for a moment. That's human. But eventually they can think about what you said. They can say, you're right. I didn't see it that way. I shouldn't have done that. I'll handle it differently next time. That ability is valuable because the real measure of character isn't whether someone makes mistakes. Everyone does. It's what they do after the mistake. Do they learn, or do they repeat? Do they repair, or do they justify? Do they take responsibility, or do they search for someone to blame? This is where time becomes your greatest ally. You don't need to interrogate people. You don't need to test them with complicated psychological games. Just observe. Let life create situations naturally. Someone will eventually be disappointed. Someone will eventually lose. Someone will eventually become jealous. Someone will eventually be wrong. Someone will eventually be ignored. Someone will eventually have power. And those moments will show you things that ordinary conversation cannot. This is why patience is such an underrated social skill. People often reveal themselves when you stop trying to figure them out. You don't need to force information. You simply create enough space for behavior to emerge. And there is another subtle signal you should learn to recognize. How quickly does someone judge other people? Listen carefully when they meet someone new. Do they immediately categorize them? He's stupid. She's fake. He's beneath us. She's desperate. He's a loser. Some people build their identity by putting others beneath them. They need hierarchy. They need someone to look down on. And eventually, if you become inconvenient, you may occupy that position. So be careful with people who constantly divide the world into superior people and inferior people, because sooner or later, you may move from one category to the other. Today, you're their favorite person. Tomorrow, you're the person they criticize. The problem wasn't that you suddenly changed. The problem was that their relationship with you was conditional on your position in their internal hierarchy. And this is why flattery should never be confused with respect. Someone can praise you and still not respect you. They can admire what you provide. They can admire your status. They can admire your appearance. They can admire your usefulness. But respect becomes visible when they disagree with you. That's when you find out whether they actually see you as an equal. So don't only pay attention to compliments. Pay attention to disagreement. Can they disagree without humiliating you? Can you disagree without fearing punishment? Can you say, I don't see it that way, without the relationship suddenly becoming hostile? If yes, there is probably some psychological room in that relationship. If no, be careful, because a relationship where disagreement is forbidden isn't intimacy, it's compliance. And there is another important thing to watch. How does someone behave when they are embarrassed? This is one of the fastest ways to see emotional maturity. Imagine someone makes a mistake in front of a group. A mature person might laugh, they might feel uncomfortable, but eventually they recover. An insecure person may immediately search for someone else to blame. They may attack the person who noticed the mistake. They may become cruel. They may turn the embarrassment into aggression. Why? Because humiliation threatens their self-image, and people who cannot tolerate feeling small may try to make someone else feel smaller. This happens everywhere, at work, in relationships and families, among friends. A person who cannot tolerate their own vulnerability often becomes dangerous when that vulnerability is exposed. So don't only observe someone's confidence, observe their relationship with weakness. Can they laugh at themselves? Can they admit they don't know? Can they ask for help? Can they say, I was wrong? These are signs of psychological strength, because weakness doesn't become dangerous when you acknowledge it. It becomes dangerous when you desperately try to hide it. Now let's talk about another signal that people often misunderstand: silence. Silence itself doesn't tell you enough, but the way someone uses silence can tell you a great deal. There is peaceful silence. There is thoughtful silence. There is uncomfortable silence. And then there is punitive silence. The person stops communicating not because they need space, but because they want you to suffer. They want you to chase them. They want you to apologize. They want you to become anxious. They want you to ask, what's wrong? What did I do? Are you mad at me? And now they have psychological control. Again, don't assume every quiet person is manipulating you. Look at the pattern. If someone says, I need some time to calm down, let's talk later, that's communication. If someone disappears specifically to make you panic and then returns when you submit, that's something different. The difference is intention and pattern. And this is why reading people requires patience. You are collecting pieces. One piece doesn't tell you the entire story, but eventually the pieces form a picture. And once you see that picture, you should trust the picture more than the isolated moments, because people can occasionally behave badly and still be good people. They can occasionally behave beautifully and still have destructive patterns. You are looking for what repeats. What repeats becomes character, and what becomes character eventually becomes destiny. There is another fascinating thing about human beings. We often reveal ourselves through the people we choose. Look at someone's closest relationships, not just the people they know, the people they repeatedly choose. What kind of people surround them? What behaviors do they tolerate? What kind of friendships do they maintain? What kind of partners do they repeatedly choose? This doesn't mean you should judge someone solely by their friends, but relationships are information, because what we repeatedly tolerate often tells us something about our values. Someone who constantly surrounds themselves with dishonest people may eventually normalize dishonesty. Someone who surrounds themselves with ambitious, disciplined people may begin to develop those qualities. Environment shapes behavior, and sometimes the people around someone reveal what that person considers normal. So observe the culture of their inner circle, not to judge, to understand. And perhaps one of the most important things you can observe is how someone reacts when you become less available. This is especially important in relationships. When you stop constantly texting, when you stop chasing, when you become busy with your own life, when you stop providing endless reassurance, what happens? A healthy person understands that you have a life. An insecure person may become anxious. A controlling person may become angry. A manipulative person may increase pressure. A person who is only interested in what you provided may simply disappear. And that disappearance can actually be useful information because sometimes losing someone's attention reveals that what you had was not connection, it was convenience. This is why you should never measure someone's interest by how intensely they pursue you at the beginning. Measure it by how consistently they respect you over time. Anyone can create excitement. Few people create safety. Anyone can make you feel desired. Fewer people make you feel respected. Anyone can tell you, I'll always be there. The important question is what happens when being there becomes inconvenient? That is where promises meet reality. And this brings us to one final principle. Never let someone else's urgency become your urgency. Manipulators often create speed. They want immediate decisions, immediate trust, immediate commitment, immediate emotional intimacy. Decide now. Trust me. Why don't you believe me? If you loved me, you would. Why are you overthinking this? Sometimes urgency is legitimate, but often time is exactly what you need because manipulation becomes much harder when you have time to think. Time allows emotion to settle. Time allows contradictions to appear. Time allows behavior to accumulate. Time gives you perspective. So when something feels emotionally intense, slow down. You don't owe anyone immediate trust. You don't owe anyone immediate access. You don't owe anyone an explanation for taking your time. And the more valuable the relationship, the more comfortable it should be with patience. Because genuine connection doesn't need to be forced. It can survive observation. It can survive questions. It can survive boundaries. It can survive time. Manipulation often cannot. So perhaps the real skill isn't learning how to read every person like a book. It's learning how to read the first few pages carefully enough that you don't hand someone the pen and allow them to rewrite your entire life. Watch, listen, wait. Notice the patterns, notice the contradictions. Notice how they behave when they don't get what they want. Notice how they behave when you succeed. Notice how they behave when you say no. Notice how they behave when they make a mistake. And most importantly, notice how you feel after spending time with them. Because sometimes your mind is still trying to justify a person your nervous system has already learned to distrust. Don't ignore that information. Investigate it. You don't need to accuse. You don't need revenge. You don't need to expose anyone. You simply need awareness. Because the strongest form of protection is not suspicion, it is clarity. When you become clear about people, you stop needing everyone to like you. You stop chasing people who give you mixed signals. You stop explaining your boundaries to people determined to cross them. You stop confusing attention with affection. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. And you stop trusting promises more than patterns. That is when something changes. You become harder to manipulate, not because you became colder, but because you became more observant. You can still be kind. You can still love. You can still trust. But now your trust has standards, and that may be one of the greatest forms of wisdom a person can develop. Because the goal isn't to build a wall around yourself. The goal is to build a door that opens slowly, a door that opens when someone's behavior proves that they deserve to come inside. And once you learn that, you stop asking, can I trust this person? You start asking the better question, have they given me enough evidence to trust them? That small change in the question can completely change your life.